Welcome to the Curmudgeon Cafe podcast. My name is Benjamin Lewis. This week I interviewed Timothy Herman. He was a friend of mine when I worked at Tualatin Valley Community Television, the cable access station here in Beaverton. His show was one of my favorites to work on. I never knew what he was going to bring in, who was going to be there. It was always exciting and always new. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Timothy Herman.
My name is Timothy Herman. Middle name is Dean, and that was my father's name, Dean Eldon Herman. I was born in McCook, Nebraska, in about this time, real close to this time of year, in February of '58. In McCook, Nebraska, and then Curtis, Nebraska, in Frontier County, which is a small county of about 3,000 people tucked between Red Willow County to the south and Lincoln County with North Platte to the north. And the Frontier County has like 5 towns in it, and Curtis is one of them. So that's my geographical beginnings, you might say. I went grades kindergarten through high school at public school there, first grade school, and then a junior senior high school, and probably about 12 students were in the same class from kindergarten through the senior year. The largest class was probably my senior year, about 33 students graduating, and that was 76. So that was one thing, the train rides as a kid, and actually our neighbor was a conductor on the Burlington Northern Railroad at that time, and there was this elderly lady that went to my dad's church there in town. He's a minister and a scrap metal dealer later. He's putting on roofs at the time. But anyway, the elderly lady, she would take us kids down to the depot, and we would hop on the caboose with Leonard Carlin. He was a conductor there, and ride the caboose over to the next town, like to Maywood, or even once Wellfleet, like 15 miles away, and then she would come and pick us up at that town and give us a ride back to Curtis. And riding in that caboose is a very fond memory, and that didn't last long. It's about the 60s. It seemed like insurance issues and liability started becoming big stuff then, and that's my understanding of partly why there's no passenger services. The railroads just want to run freight, and they don't want to be worried about human liability. Let's see, other stories. Well, it was a rural community, and I really did enjoy growing up there. And even today, I spend about half my time back there because I don't forget where I come from. And it's also a pretty easy living when you compare it to a metro area. The ease of getting around Frontier County, Nebraska, population 3,000, it's quite a peaceful place. We would go down to the Medicine Creek as kids, and about maybe a 6-foot wide creek in places, and 3 foot deep. Not much of a creek, but it's been there historically, and as Indians had the name Spirit Lake or something, which kind of translated to medicine. So that's like the geographical feature through the center of the county from northwest, southeast, and Curtis sat on the shelf on the north side of the creek and about a half mile away, so the creek was accessible. And we spent a lot of time, in the creek area playing as kids, and then hunting pheasant down the railroad tracks was a common thing to do. And then my dad, we weren't, always very modest means, but my dad always had work for us. I mean, we didn't get an allowance, but we could always go to work. So I worked with my dad from the age of 4 when he was roofing houses, and I'd be picking scraps up off the ground and putting them in a pile, making a nickel an hour. And then I remember when I got a raise to a dime, and I was busy calculating during the summertime, because that was always, you know, I had 7 brothers and sisters, and summertime would come, and I can clearly remember my mom saying to Dad, "Dean, get these kids out of the house, take them to work with you." So we did. I had the privilege of working with my father many years of my life. Later in life, with a scrapyard, Curtis Metals, in which we were a fairly major employer of the county. And then later on, after that venture kind of got busted out by the Department of Transportation, we even piddled around together with pickup and trailer later in life and in his later years. So you know, without going on and on, that's kind of a picture of the flavor of my childhood, I guess you might say. My dad was a minister, so there was no smoking or drinking around the house, and we weren't allowed to go to the movies. I probably snuck into my first movie when I was 11, and that was a major deal. I think it was 101 Dalmatians, and I kind of lucked out and called up and said I was going to stay over at my friends that night, and they let me do it, so I didn't even have to tell them where I was.
Okay.
As religious and I don't know, as my parents were in their beliefs and stuff, they were very respectful of all of us kids' personal space and privacy, and they weren't the kind of parents who went through our drawers to confront us with whatever we were hiding. They just wasn't like that at all, and it really was fortunate to have a couple of the finest parents in the world. They're both gone now. So yeah, the United States Navy, I went in May 11th of '76, and I was in the nuclear power program as an electrician's mate. So that was a 6-year program, and so I didn't get out until May 10th of '82, and for 4 years and 2 months of that time, I was attached to the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier as a ship service side nuclear electrician, and I have worked with a very good bunch of guys that were quality people, and you know, none of us particularly cared for the military part of the service, and we, fortunately, with the nuclear Navy, we didn't have to spend a lot of time shining our shoes and making formations and whatever. Our job was to run the reactor, and that was our prime #1 job, and we took that very seriously, and we were trained pretty well to do it. And we got the work done, and when the work was done, you were expected to be gone. And I mean, if you were still around, it's because you were sick or something, you know, but it's like, what? And we put enough time at sea that when we were in port, you had duty every 3rd day, and the other 2 days it was like, you know, as long as your work's done, get out of here. And then, and so we did, and we also were able to buy off our duty days, where if some usually married young man trying to, you know, do everything he could for his family would be willing to stay on the ship for $10 for a duty day, and he was qualified to stand the watch as you were, and make sure that your watch got handled for that day, then you were free to make that transaction with whoever guaranteed your place on the watch station, and that was perfectly fine. I think we did put in a approval request for it to happen, but that was easy enough handled. And so I was in boot camp in Great Lakes, and then had 10 weeks of electrician mate, regular conventional electrical school there after boot camp at Great Lakes. And it was really never my intention to be a nuke. Just that if you went in as a nuke, they gave you automatic E3. And the way my recruiter had explained it to me was that, well, what's so great about the nuclear power program is you can go in as E3 and a nuke, and then you got till you go through your conventional school, and if you don't like it, you can tell them that you're not accepting your automatic E4, and you'd rather just go to the conventional fleet, and then you just have 4 years instead of the extra 2-year commitment for going to nuclear power school. So about 2/3 of the way through my electrical conventional school, I went in and told my class advisor that, I think I'll just be a regular conventional electrician and do my 4 years, and just want, when I finish with the electrical school here, that's enough, and I'll just do the 4 years, and thank you very much. And the class director says, well, believe it or not, you've agreed to extend for the 2 years. And so I wrote a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations requesting to be disenrolled from the nuclear power program, and he said I could do that and it'd probably be denied. And sure enough, I got a letter back that basically said, we spent a lot of money hunting for you and found you, and you're capable of making it through the program. Therefore, your request to be disenrolled is denied. So I actually became a nuke against my will, and I went, as a choice was, being dishonorably discharged, or at least a general discharge for being a screw up, or, just kind of sucking up and kind of doing what I got screwed into doing, sort of, and making sure I kept my nose clean and got honorably discharged, which was what I did. And it was a long 6 years of a young man's life, but I made some really fine friends as a result of it. I did not go work in the nuclear power industry after I got out, as probably 90% of my friends did. That's what pretty much runs the nuclear power plants around the nations, are ex-Navy nuclear power qualified people. And I could probably walk at Palo Verde nuclear plant in Arizona and maybe see up to 50 people that I know from the Nimitz that are operating that plant alone. Yeah, so, but like I said, I learned a fair amount about radiation, and a little bit about how reactors operate, and I was not convinced then, and I am certainly not convinced now, that nuclear power is a real good way to go. There's no free lunch, I guess, but what is particularly pernicious about nuclear power is if there is a contamination problem, it's something you need instrumentation for to even know there is a problem. And without instrumentation, you can be dying irradiated without even knowing why. And it's nothing you can see, smell, or taste. But it's something, if there's a serious meltdown and that stuff is allowed to reach the atmosphere, it can kill a lot of people. And both in Japan with Fukushima and Chernobyl, which I understand was worse than the Japan accident, as bad as the Japan accident is, there are long-term health effects going with the populations of both areas, and the Fukushima people haven't, even had the right of return to their own property because of that thing. And that's, you know, if you get a bunch of sludge or debris or something, you can clean it up and get it out of there, and it can be something that can be cleaned up. But when you're talking about massive contamination of all vegetation and dirt and just everywhere on every surface, and it's so toxic that you can't even get into it without special equipment and suits to clean it up, that's pretty pernicious.
If you've been following the Curmudgeon Cafe YouTube channel at youtube.com/curmudgeoncafe, you'll see that I've already posted a video of Tim's advice to listen to the quotes of Mark Twain. And if you visit audibletrial.com/curmudgeon and sign up for a 1-month free trial, you can download one free audiobook of your choice. And in honor of Tim's advice to listen to the quotes of Mark Twain, I'm recommending one of my favorite books of his, A Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. You can find that book and over 150,000 other titles. Visit audibletrial.com/curmudgeon today and sign up for your free trial. Now back to our interview with Timothy Herman.
As a result of our liberal liberty time and being able to buy people off duty days, I rarely studied duty day at all. So I got a lot of time off in Italy and some in Germany, and got to go to Switzerland, learn to ski there. And I really did get a lot of neat time in Europe. Athens, Haifa, Israel, Alexandria, Egypt, Lisbon, Portugal, Rota, Spain, Wilhelmshaven, Germany on the north and west coast, and Portsmouth, even not Algeria, but Tunisia. We pulled into Tunisia, Tunis at that port. So I got a good dose of the Mediterranean. Also, I guess I should mention the Iranian hostage crisis. They sent us around Africa. We spent 5 months off the coast of Iran. I listened to helicopters take off for that mission, and that was April around the 20th of 80, and it was a big failure when Carter was president, and then we sailed back to Norfolk, Virginia. So from January 4th of 1980 to May 27th of 1980, 144 days, I didn't see another female or put my foot on land as a result of that hostage rescue attempt and being in the military at that particular time with the politics and geopolitical situation the way it was. So that was a very significant event. I got out May 10th of 1980. I had a couple of weeks of terminal leave build up, almost 3, so I was actually able to leave the ship the last time before the end of April of 1982 it was. And that was one of the happiest days of my life, never to have to request permission to go ashore from anyone ever again, and not to be sleeping in a bunk room where there was 280 by 80. Yeah, it was a real good feeling to just get off the ship and be done with it. Yes, it was. After 4 years and 2 months on a boat, you can look around and there's not very many people who have been there longer than you have. So I went back to Nebraska, Curtis, where I grew up, and my dad had scrap business going on as Curtis Metals was the name of the company, and it was sole proprietorship, and so I poured my efforts into helping my dad with the business for the next year and a half, so that'd be till fall of '83, and then in the spring of '83 I went on a university search, because the two biggest reasons probably for going in the military were, one was the VA healthcare system. My dad was hurt when I was young, and he was a veteran, and the VA healthcare system eliminated medical bills, and that was a very impressionable event on a 13-year-old at the time when my dad was hurt. And so then the other thing was the GI Bill, which my dad also went to school on, the GI Bill, get his education. And so those were probably the two biggest incentives for going in the military. The other thing is they just got, the politicians had just got their fingers burned pretty badly by Vietnam, and I thought that, you know, maybe I'd get a 6-year law where they wouldn't be, you know, pulling any foreign military adventures because the public just wouldn't stand for it. And basically that was pretty much how it worked. For the next 6 years while I was in, other than that Iranian hostage drama thing, it was a fairly quiet world militarily for the U.S. So I'm helping my dad with the business for 1.5 years. I offer to stay full-time with the business, but my dad told me it was time to get into school. So I did. I went to the Industrial and Management Engineering program up at Montana State from the fall of '83 through June of '87, was my time on Industrial and Management Engineering program at Montana State. Had a good bunch of classmates in that senior class, some of which were through pretty much the whole program together in classes. I really enjoy Montana. It's one of my favorite states. I've always known, getting back to knowing what I wanted when I was little, at 4 years old, when we went on a trip to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I seen the mountains in Colorado and Albuquerque on the way down. I knew from the time that I was 4 that I wanted to live in, or at least close to, the mountains. And by and large, outside of the half time I spend in Nebraska, in Portland, Oregon, and Montana, which are the only 2 other post-naval time places that I've really lived in for any length of time at all. They are, Bozeman was completely surrounded by mountains. I lived in Missoula more recently for 1/3 of a year, about 3 or 4 years ago, and that's completely surrounded by mountains, just a wonderful place. And out here in Portland, you have Mount Hood that looks over us daily, and Mount Tabor right in the middle of the city limits, and the West Hills. It's just kind of a mountainous place, and which is one reason why I like it here. The other nice thing about Portland, which I did not move to till October 1st of '89 was my first trip into Portland. So I did my 4 years of school in Bozeman. I come back every summer break I had, every Christmas break, even Thanksgiving break, to help with the business in Nebraska. So that was like a 950-mile drive about every time I did it one way. But I love driving across Wyoming and Montana, and it just is, the whole Northwest is a great area. Then after '87 to '89, I helped with the business, Curtis Metals, for 2 more years, and then we just got hammered into the ground from Department of Transportation regulation, and that would be a whole nother deal in itself. I don't have enough time to go into all that, but it pretty much hammered my dad's business into the ground. And October 1st, I was driving into Portland, never having been to the state in my life, to start my new life on the West Coast. It wasn't California, it wasn't Seattle, Tacoma. I'd been to both of those places, and so I figured, well, I've never been to Oregon yet, so it's time to just go there, and I've been very happy with that process of elimination for my decision. So that's how I arrived in my Portland versus some other place. I want to go to the West Coast because I wanted to do a return trip to Asia. I was over in Malaysia a couple times right after the Navy in '82 for 6 weeks in the summer visiting a friend, and then again in the summer of '85. Malaysia is not my next overseas destination, but hopefully Vladivostok, Russia is. It's been in 20 years and I'm still working on that program. But at least I have a kind of a base in the Portland area where I can, once I decide I'm going, I have a comfortable West Coast base and don't have to get from like Nebraska to the coast and then go over. I can just go. I had an aunt and uncle that lived in San Jose in California, so when I was in high school, the summer I was 17, I went to San Jose with a cousin of mine and stayed with my aunt and uncle and him for about 4 weeks in the middle of the summer of that would have been 75. So I got a pretty good dose of the San Jose metro deal. They took me down to San Francisco a time or two during that time. I got to go over to the beach at Santa Cruz, I think it is, kind of south and west maybe of San Jose along the coast. Just California, just the causeways and the walled off subdivisions, and I don't know, just not my style of stuff. I like more like 2-lane streets and blocks that are like normal what blocks used to be in the 40s and 30s when they first started building towns. The mega block thing is not my cup of tea. And so I got San Francisco, San Jose covered during that time, and then when I went to Malaysia, I left from San Jose on my first visit in San Francisco after visiting a few more days. Then in LA, I was down there for Oxnard, actually Ventura. I stayed with a friend there, but I was in LA area, metro there, for 7 weeks the summer of '88. And this brings me back to what pretty much was the beginning of the end of my dad's business. And what I was doing there was I was transloading 16 semi-loads of scrap batteries that needed to be transported 3 miles from the Union Pacific Railroad lot, number 6, underneath the 710 in LA, over to the battery plant at G&B Gould Corporation, where they were going. And these batteries had been gathered up around the central of the U.S. In piggyback vans, and weighed shipping them according to federal regulations. And then one day the plant manager, purchasing guy, called up my dad, and this was like June 6th of '88, and says, we don't know what's going on over at the railroad yard, but one of the transloaders got into it with a California Highway Patrolman, and until those batteries got to their plant gate, they were our batteries. So I drove overnight, had one of the employees drive me to Denver, so I'd be rested, got a red-eye flight to LA, rented a car, and I was on site at the railroad yard at 10 o'clock the very next morning to see what the problem was. And basically, their accusation is our vans were leaking acid, and I never ever did get anything in writing from them on that regard. Is just that the California Highway Patrolman immediately placed all vans out of service, told the Union Pacific Railroad that they were shutting down scrap battery shipments into the state of California, and that every load piggyback that came in that had scrap batteries on it was to be parked at railroad lot number 6, I think it was, underneath the 710 freeway. And so out of 25 piggyback loads of scrap batteries that came in to Southern California, LA, there to be environmentally safely recycled at the plant, 16 of them were from little bitty old Curtis Metals out of Curtis, Nebraska. I don't know, you know, like I said, we didn't really get an official accusation out of them. This California Highway Patrolman was allowed to put the out-of-service stickers on them. I couldn't get a trailer moved until I had 2 layers of plastic down. I had all these batteries out of the vans, palletized on pallets, stretch wrapped. I mean, it's just, I got it done, but it took 7 weeks. And like I said, out of 25 loads that came in, 16 of them were from us, some little company out in Nebraska somewhere that, out of the western United States market, had evidently 16 out of 25. You can figure the percentage of market share we had. And I think we was just getting a little bit too big for somebody's britches somewhere to continue to operate. And they had to do something about it, and that was it. And that's really the lesson I took away from that deal, was that it don't matter what your education is. It doesn't matter how well you're following the rules. We were following the CFR regulations for shipping batteries. We knew exactly what they were, and that's how we shipped them, is what we did for business. It's about how much you give the politicians, because this thing went on for 7 weeks, and we wrote, you know, if something goes on for 7 weeks, you got time to make a phone call, write a letter, even wait for a response and write a second letter. You know, 7 weeks going on. And we were doing that. We were writing our representative, our governor, our senator, the California representative for the area that I was being hung up by this dude in, governor, the senators. And the fact is that unless you have given them people a $500 or $1,000 campaign donation, your request for, you know, an ear, so that something from the top comes down the situation and says, what's going on here? This company's following regulations, but they still got a problem. And when, yeah, so my recommendation, if you want to do business on a national scale, the first thing you need to do is secure about $500,000 for political campaign donations. And you give the governor of every state $1,000. You give the 2 senators of every state you're doing business in $1,000. Give the representatives their $500 check. And you make sure that all these politicians in all these states you're doing business with, that you have given them a significant campaign donation, so that when you're being held up by a bureaucrat, and for no valid reason, that you can actually get some justice in the matter. And that's what I've learned about doing business in this country in my life, and that experience is a direct lesson of my life in that regard. 3 strikes and you're out kind of philosophy on my part with that. That was the first horror story. I wound up getting detained in Minnesota, Minneapolis, at a weigh station there with a truck that I personally was driving that time, and that was like a $5,000 incident. Then several months after that, we had a truck and trailer that was detained at a weigh station in Nebraska, our very own state that we were doing business in. That was like a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 deal. And after that third incident, you know, it was just hammering my dad's business into the ground. And I just told my dad at that time that, you know, we're big enough here that you and I can sit in the yard we have along the railroad tracks, and I have a crane with a magnet on it, and we can pretty much let these little dealer dudes bring us in material all day long, because we've been in the business that long enough. We don't even have to advertise. They all know they're here. They all keep bringing our stuff into us, and we don't need 12 truck drivers and 15 full-time employees and another 10 part-timers. It'd just be real simple, you and I, and my dad would have nothing of that. He was always a crew guy. And it was his business, and he says, no, I need a truck, got to have a truck, get around and get things done. And I said, fine. I said, I'm going to Portland. And it wasn't, you know, a real argument. It was just a difference in methodology of business operations, and it was his business, it wasn't mine. So when he refused to scale down and drop trying to run a semi-truck with all of its regulatory burdens and risk around the countryside, I just said, I've had enough of it. I've been in LA, I've been in Minneapolis, and my dad was actually on scene at the time near Lincoln, Nebraska, where the third incident happened. I said, you know, I don't mind playing on a field that's roughly level, as long as it's level. But when, you know, the field is stacked and the Department of Transportation dude is God and you're so much spit, it's time to get off the field. And you have to do that to maintain your own sanity and stay out of trouble, because when people are robbing thousands of dollars from you, you begin to think about, you know, how that's happening, and it just, you know, you don't even want to go there. So you have to get out of it before you do something stupid against one of those people. And that's what I did. So it was that time and that basic break and methodology of operation of a scrap business between my dad and I that I just said, okay, I'm going to Portland. I'm not putting up with the trucks anymore. You're going to hang on to a truck. We'll see you later. And then, you know, my dad at the time, that was 89. He was born in 22. So if he wasn't 70, 29 and 70 is 99, he was near his 70s. I just, yeah, within 6 months, the one truck that he had was broken down, and that was the end of the trucking business. But, you know, the business went bust, but one thing is the bank, they got their money. They got paid off, and it took my dad's Social Security a few years to get that done, but everything was squared away, and even though we went bust, it was not a bankruptcy. That's when I come to Portland. And then I got a job as a phone market research interviewer. I won't sell stuff over the phone, but I will collect people's opinions if they're willing to talk to me. So I did that for a year and a half, then I found a full-time spreadsheet job. It lasted 4.5 years till they shut down the factory and moved the warehouse to Nevada. And then since then, I have spent probably real close to half my time in Portland, Oregon, and half my time in Nebraska. And the job that I had at the Sight and Sound Distributing was the name of the outfit. They distributed CDs and cassettes to the G.I. Joes and Kmarts and stuff, the big box stores. And, you know, I did the sales and budget analyst numbers every day, gave them their sales report. And that was, you know, the job took 10 minutes a day. The other 7 hours and 50 minutes of it was looking like I was doing something. And then that's why I also got involved with cable access when I seen Ace Hayes, who was talking about the political situation of the country one night. And he was talking about Panama, because that was in early '90 when Noriega and Panama was heating up. And I had just read a couple books about Noriega and how our government, you know, sent him to Lisbon, Portugal, the school the CIA ran as a young cadet, and kind of coddled him to his dictatorship of where he was. And there's like Our Man in Panama, I believe, is one of them, and then Raising a Dictator, that was the other one. Well, there were two different independent authors telling pretty much the same story. And actually, Ace Hayes, when I'm watching the access on the house where I was staying at the time, who I only would have got watching it because I had a roommate move in who that was the first thing he did was got cable TV. So I myself have never really owned a TV to watch. I have had a Portland Cable Access TV show for over 20 years, and that was my first hook to get involved when I seen this Ace Hayes dude actually lifting up one of those books that I had read about Noriega and the CIA and what was going on with things and why they were, stuff was happening the way it was, and it immediately got my attention. And I just thought, I don't know what I'm watching, but it's not broadcast television. And this stuff is real. And, this is actually some serious investigative journalism going on, and stuff that the networks wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. And so then I would watch that, and I was working full-time at the time, but I eventually got around to going down to one of these Ace Hayes secret government seminars, and finding out, is this for real? Are people really sitting around talking about this stuff? And this Ace Hayes dude, would be up front, and they'd just keep the camera on him, kind of like this camera's on me, and then the room full of people would be free to talk without having to worry about their picture being on television or anything. And then that would air on the cable access. And it happened every other week till about 95, and then we went once a month after that. And George H.W. Bush came to town September 19th, and I helped in a cable access producer's effort with that, with Flow and Focus, and then that was when I really got actively involved with cable access television, which is a whole nother chapter.
We're almost halfway through the first season of the Curmudgeon Cafe podcast, and I hope you've been enjoying the program so far. For season 2, I thought it would be a good idea to focus all of the interviews around a single theme. I have a couple of ideas about what I would like the theme to be, maybe living the dream, or craftsmanship, or even entertainers. But I want to hear from you. I'd like to know what you would like the theme of season 2 of the Curmudgeon Cafe podcast to be. So leave us a message on Facebook, tweet us at Curmudgeon Cafe, or send an email to suggestions@curmudgeoncafe.net. I would love to get feedback from the audience as to what the theme of Curmudgeon Cafe Season 2 should be. Thank you. Now let's get back to our interview with Timothy Herman.
Cable access television in Portland. When I was on the ship going back to my 5 months at sea without liberty while we're steaming circles off the coast of Iran, not even knowing how long we're going to be there. We didn't get told we was going back to the States till 2 or 3 weeks before we headed back. So from January when we left Naples, Italy, until May, we didn't even know when we'd come back. It's like you can't even ask the question. Nobody's got an answer to it. So you just kind of go into this, state of shock, whatever, numbness, because there's some things you just can't worry about because there's no answer for it. And that was one of those things. So yeah, it gave you a lot of time to think about stuff. And in my case, why are 10,000 sailors out here on the ocean because a couple politicians can't sit down and work something out over coffee, essentially. And it's stupid. And so I just figured that at any time in the future in my life, that if I had a chance to affect the public debate and opinion on wars and national conflicts and the way they happen or not happen, preferably, that I was going to do so. And so that was the spring, early summer of 1980 when I made that decision during that long stretch at sea that I had a lot of time to think about a lot of stuff. And then in 1990, when I moved to Portland, Oregon, and my friend got the access, and then I found Ace Hayes on cable access, was when I went, bingo, that's it. And I have been involved in cable access and had a live talk television show by the name of Infotainment in Portland for over 22 years. From about August of '91 was probably my first live show. And then up until as recently as November of 2013 was probably my last show. I might have had one, I think, in February of 2014. And then the Tualatin Valley Community Television is what they call the system in West County here, Washington County, Portland metro area. They've just done an excellent job of whittling down access through bureaucratic hurdles, changing the location of the facilities, requiring new courses, not really able to get the crew together like you used to be able to, and so through my best description of it is bureaucratic inertia of the system that is there as it exists now, as far as I can tell, I have lost the show Infotainment that has aired consistently for over 20 years on the system, and finally after all this time, they're able to pretty much knock Mr. System and I, he is my co-host and producer of the show Infotainment, off the air. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to stay off. At some point, I'm going to get back to it, but I had a fire back in Maywood, Nebraska, where I have a house and stay when I'm in Frontier County, Nebraska, on that half of my life, and 80% of my roof burned, and so my last 2 years of my life has been pretty occupied by cleaning up my property and then getting a roof over it before the town of Maywood got permission to bulldoze what was left of my house after the fire and then bill me for it, leaving me with vacant lots that were, had a lien on them for what they're worth. And that's a whole nother chapter in the story. But because of that, probably more than anything, is why I finally have given up trying to stay on the access after over 20 years. And like I said, it's a temporary thing. My full intention is to get back at least once a month. So we're presently, I'm in Portland for the first time in 9 months because, and this is February, third week or so of February, and that was, I actually left Portland last in April for Nebraska to go continue dealing with my property issue in Maywood, Nebraska. And this is my first opportunity that I have had to get back to town, since then. Maywood is a town of 330 people about. Like I said, there's only 3,000 people in the entire county of Frontier County, Nebraska. The Frontier County seat is named Stockville, and it got its name because in 1872, when Frontier County was organized, it was organized as a free-range county, which meant that if you were a farmer who moved to Frontier County, it was your obligation to put a fence up to keep the stock out, and not the rancher's obligation to worry about the fence because it was free range. And the kind of common understanding is that that's how Stockville got its name, was that they had to build a fence up around the town to keep the stock out. And the population of Stockville today is like 30, maybe 50 people. It has the distinction of being the last courthouse in the nation to have a paved highway going to it. I can remember the 13-mile gravel road that had to turn about every section line from Curtis down to Stockville when they put in the highway, and around 67, when I was maybe about 10 years old or so, it cut a 13-mile trip to the county seat that was gravel with a bunch of corners to 10 miles with a nice smooth new highway with a slight bend in the 10 miles. And but there's still only 30, 50 people in Stockville. I don't know what the current sign says. This is also the last courthouse in the nation to get indoor plumbing, I understand. It's Frontier County is an interesting place, and like I said, I don't forget where I come from. Advice I have for young people is listen to a lot of Mark Twain's quotes. One of them is, I'd rather be silent and be assumed a fool than to open my mouth and remove all doubts. I guess be a good listener is kind of the crux of that one. And, I like to talk, and I probably have done my fair share of it. But as a participant in conversation, be careful about your conversation and allow the person you're having conversation with feel free to not be interrupted and finish their thoughts. And patience is required for that. If you will not allow people to speak, that denies you the privilege of hearing what they were going to say. And even though you might have a lot of bright ideas and everything, two heads are usually better than one. And in the interest of efficiencies and solutions in your communications, this is extremely important. And as a talk show host, it seems to be a requirement that they're so egotistical that their guest might get a chance to ask one question, and then after that it's all over. The talk show host just walks all over them, and then it's on to the next questioner. And that to me is a very poor example of a talk show host. And I would like to think of George Norrie on Coast to Coast radio network, if any out there listen to that. He's kind of my idea of a good talk show host. He's listens to a lot of wacky people saying wacky stuff on the one hand, but then he also listens to a lot of serious people saying serious stuff. But I guess the point is he lets the listener be that filter, and he doesn't feel as a talk show host that. I mean, he'll put up with a lot of diatribe from a host before he realizes that he just got to shut it down and move on. And that's to me, if you're going to do a talk show host, which if you're going to influence public opinion, that's what talk show hosts all I guess their dream is to do. And so that's just a good overall thing in life is be a good listener.
Welcome to the Curmudgeon Cafe podcast. My name is Benjamin Lewis. This week I interviewed Timothy Herman. He was a friend of mine when I worked at Tualatin Valley Community Television, the cable access station here in Beaverton. His show was one of my favorites to